Hi, it's Lorraine and welcome back to my channel. The topic of today's discussion is going to be surrounding the diagnosis that we obtained for Theo and what that journey and process looked like for us. So just a little bit of a background in terms of our family and our dynamics and setup. So we are a family of four: myself, my husband Nick, Theo and his elder sister Talia. Talia is 4, she'll be 5 next month, and Theo will be 4 in October. So we had Talia and we found out, I think Talia was about 8 months old, that I was pregnant again. We had always wanted 2 children close together in age, so it wasn't a real surprise to us when we fell pregnant so soon after having Talia. The pregnancy itself was all very straightforward. I'd had a few complications when I was pregnant with Talia, which I didn't really have too badly when I was pregnant with Theo. We had a difficult time when having Theo, but that's not something I really want to go into. So Theo was born in October in 2014, and we kind of settled quite well into family life with a family of 2 children, 2 young children. I struggled quite a lot in the early days because of my experience from having Theo, so I struggled a lot with my mental health. I worried a lot about Theo from the get-go, straight away, without there being any reason other than what had happened. But you know, once we were home and Theo had the all clear, so day-to-day life was a struggle for me, but you know, I kind of just tried to push myself through and started to try to enjoy my time with Talia and also Theo as a young baby. Nothing really was particularly glaringly obvious. Theo met all of his very early milestones. He crawled at, I think he was about 9-10 months old, and he started to walk about 2 weeks after his first birthday. So in terms of crawling and walking and sitting up and everything he did, you know, just about the right age that he would have been expected to do all of those things. And the same in terms of baby talk or babbling. I mean, he started babbling, I think he must have been about 8 or 9 months old, and he continued to babble. He did say a few words in the very early days, and then that kind of stopped. He didn't really progress any further than the babbling. He continued to babble. The words, I'd say words, I think he had maybe 2 words, and I can't remember off the top of my head what they were now. I think one was bye and another was go, possibly. And he stopped saying those, but he did continue to babble. So we kind of just assumed everything was okay. He had a development check at around 13-14 months old, and nothing was flagged up, you know, there as an issue. We hadn't really noticed a great deal. I did kind of have maybe a gut feeling that something wasn't right. I did talk to some friends about some of the worries and concerns that I had about Theo. And at the time, my friends were very reassuring and tried to suggest that I shouldn't compare both Talia and Theo because they were very, very different. Talia was and still is very, very sociable. She thrived on being around people, children and adults. She loved it. She just wanted to play with other people. She just wanted to be in someone else's company. Whereas Theo was always very content being by himself. I guess one of the early things that we noticed with Theo was that, when he was sitting up and crawling, we would try to get down on the floor with him and try and play with him, which normally would result in him crawling off, or putting down whatever it was he was playing with, and would lose interest in that because we had tried to engage with him. So I think that was probably one of the earliest things that I noticed, and I think I probably would have noticed that maybe around, or maybe just after his first birthday. So he could have been walking away as well, I guess. And I remember talking to people, and people are always very kind and they want to reassure you when you have worries about your own child, and they want to be supportive, and just reassure you that there's nothing wrong. But I think I kind of just had this gut, like I said, this gut feeling, something deep inside was telling me that maybe there wasn't something quite right. And that just niggled away at me for a fair few months afterwards. I think we got to probably about 15, 16 months old, and Theo still wasn't saying words. His babbling was still there. He'd stopped saying the couple of words that he had tried to say. He wasn't asking in the same sort of ways that Tally would have asked for things like a drink or something to eat. He wasn't pointing to things. He wasn't showing shared interest in things with us or with Talia. He often would, when he was mobile and walking, he would often take himself to an area of the downstairs of our house. I mean, our house isn't very big, so there isn't much space for him to have gone to, but he would take himself to an area or a space where he would be by himself, whether that be in a different room or behind the sofa or something. I also started to notice that he didn't really play with toys. He had more of an interest in very random objects, pieces of thread or plastic cutlery, just random items. It could have been a piece of a jigsaw puzzle or something, and he would become very obsessed with those particular items, and he would look at them very intently. And I don't remember Talia doing that, so I kind of, flagged up and questioned friends again about my concerns, and kind of, was talking to them about my worries. And I think that just kind of continued. Theo's speech still wasn't developing. By the age of 18 months old, he still hadn't progressed any further than babbling, and it was becoming more and more apparent that Theo was much more content by himself. Other things that we had started to notice, or I say we, more me, I think my husband struggled a lot when I was making suggestions that there might be something wrong. I think he was maybe a bit in denial at the beginning and didn't want to accept that there was anything wrong. So one of the other things that I noticed was that Theo wouldn't respond to his name. So you could say his name 50 times and he still wouldn't turn to look at you. I don't even think he knew that that was his name. So then I started to worry whether there was something wrong with his hearing. Maybe he wasn't hearing me when I was calling his name. Although when I made that suggestion, I kind of knew again that wasn't the case, because he heard other things. He heard music, he heard the TV, he would get very upset at certain noises, certain pitches. So I did know that it probably wasn't going to be his hearing. I did pin my hopes on it, that it was going to be that, and we could get a solution and move forward, and it would be quite straightforward in that case. So I spoke with Theo's health visitor, and we were referred to the hearing test team at our local hospital. That came through quite quickly, which was a relief, and we went in for the hearing test, and Theo passed with no flags or concerns or anything raised in that test. His hearing was absolutely fine. So it was back to the drawing board again as to why Theo wasn't responding to his name, why he hadn't progressed with his speech, in terms of his social interaction. He wasn't wanting to interact with us or others. He didn't like to be around other people. He had very limited eye contact. He rarely gave us eye contact, and he most definitely didn't give eye contact to people he didn't know. So these were all things that were making me, very worried and concerned. I hadn't at that point any idea what it could have been. I was just concerned that there was something wrong, and I wanted to find out what it was. And as most people do, I took to Google and I typed in some of the things that I had noticed, and lots of articles kept popping up about autism. And I was so shocked when I saw that, because I hadn't even thought about it. I guess it wasn't on my radar because I didn't know any young children with autism. I hadn't any first-hand experience of autism, so I guess it wasn't something that was on my radar. And then I found a questionnaire online which had been specifically designed for toddlers, and it was a checklist type questionnaire, and it had been put together by the American Autism Association, I think that's what they were called. And yeah, it was a number of different questions that you went through, and at the end of it, it gave you a suggestion. So whether your child was developing okay, whether they thought that you needed to seek medical help, etc. So I filled out the checklist by myself. My husband was at work, so I filled that out myself. I then sent a copy to my husband and asked him to similarly do the same and fill it out. And then when he got home from work, we went through that together, and I think the realisation at that point started to hit my husband, and he started to think that actually maybe there was something wrong also. I think in some ways that was a relief for me, because up until that point pretty much everyone had been telling me that there wasn't anything wrong, and he would be fine, and it was just a phase. So it was almost a relief in a way that my husband was starting to think along the same lines as me. So the questionnaire said that Thea had a number of red flags and that we were to seek medical attention straight away. Obviously, I think the system in America works completely different to what it does over here in the UK. So I didn't really know what to do after that. I contacted Theo's health visitor, who said that Theo was too young and that we just needed to wait. So at this point he was probably about 18, 19 months old. Yeah, we were just to wait and see what happened. I'm not particularly great at waiting. I'm not a very patient person, and I couldn't just wait. I really needed to know what was going on. I wanted some answers. So I went to the GP, our local doctor, and I discussed with her about my concerns with Theo. And she again basically told me that Theo was too young. She essentially told me that I should wait until he started school to even bother looking into things, because there was no point in doing anything before he was at school, which to me just sounded ludicrous, because Theo's birthday is in October, so in the UK the school year starts in September, which means that Theo wouldn't start school until he was almost 5 years old. So by that point, you know, it would take quite a while to get the ball in motion at the age of 5. So we would have been looking at him being quite a lot older before getting a diagnosis and then in any support in place. So I kind of left the GP surgery feeling really deflated. And quite upset that, you know, she had said that, and, you know, she'd said a number of very unhelpful things. So it was, you know, that was a difficult time. But I didn't want to be defeated. I wanted to get some answers. So I did some research to see where else I could take Theo, to see if we could get any help or support. And I found that at the time our local area offered drop-in clinics with speech and language therapists. It was on a first come first served basis, and you could basically turn up to these sessions, which were held in some children's centres across the borough that I live in. And you could turn up and you could see a speech and language therapist, which was fantastic. So one morning I took my daughter to preschool, and then myself and Theo got in the car and we drove to one of the local children's centres, and we waited to see a speech and language therapist. And I think by far that was the best thing that I ever did, to go and to believe in my gut instinct and to talk to somebody professionally. And she was amazing. She sat there and she listened. She let me get everything off my chest. She let me cry. She let me rant, all along, you know, throughout that time that I spent with her. She didn't rush me. I didn't feel like I was wasting her time. She observed Theo. She tried to interact with Theo, and she really listened to my concerns. And at the end of kind of getting everything off my chest, she said that obviously she wasn't able to offer any kind of diagnosis or indication as to what might be wrong, but she could make a referral for Theo to see the consultant paediatrician. So that was the first step towards getting some answers. So I said yes, that I would very much like her to make that referral. She let me know that it could take up to 18 weeks to be seen. So time passed. I felt very slowly. I just wanted to know. I kept Googling things. I kept watching YouTube videos. I just wanted to find out what was going on with Theo. Obviously, there wasn't any way of being able to find that out online. You know, I just had to be patient and wait for the appointment. But like I said before, I'm not particularly patient. I'm not good at waiting. Anyway, the 18 weeks passed, and we had our appointment with the paediatrician. Actually, it was on Theo's second birthday that we got the appointment to be seen. So myself and my husband took Theo across to see the consultant. And again, she was absolutely brilliant, really, really lovely. She didn't rush us. She listened to everything that we had to say. She observed Theo, tried to talk to him, interact with him, play some games with him. and everything like that. And she asked us at that time, did we have anything that we thought it might be? And we did touch on the subject that we thought perhaps maybe it was autism. And she at the time said that Theo was possibly just a little bit too young to know, but she did say that he did display strong traits of autism. So what she wanted us to do was to wait. And that was the worst thing that she could have said, because I felt like we had been waiting forever. But she wanted us to wait just a little bit longer to see how Theo developed and to see whether anything changed. And she offered us to go back and see her after, it must have been 4 months. Yeah, it must have been 4 months, after 4 months. So we went back. Nothing had changed. Theo continued doing what he was doing. He was babbling still, but he had no words. His eye contact was very poor. He had lots of different repetitive behaviours, such as shuttle running, hand flapping, toe walking, jumping up and down, shaking his head. He was headbutting. Yeah, he definitely must have been headbutting at that time. He liked to hit his head, the back of his head, against the wall. And also around that time his sleep had become very, very bad. I mean, he was sleeping for maybe an hour or two in one go. So he would have a nap for maybe an hour, maybe two, and then he would wake up, and then he would be awake, and then it would be bedtime and he'd sleep maybe another 2 hours, and then that would be it. He would be awake then for the rest of the night. So I remember that time being really, really hard, really, really difficult to manage. His sleep was really, really bad. Yeah, so things were just really, really difficult. Sorry, there's somebody just outside of my kitchen window really distracting me. Yeah, so things were really, really difficult. Nothing had really changed, no real development or progress. So we went back to see the consultant, and she agreed that there had been no progress, nothing had really changed, and so she wanted Theo to attend an assessment session, which was a 3-week observation session where Theo would be seen within a group. There were 5 other children around a similar age, and they were all to be observed. So they all had suspected ASD, so they were all being observed, and in the observation session there was the consultant paediatrician, there was a speech and language therapist, an occupational therapist, a nursery nurse worker, and also a lady from the local authority, from the council, who was there for education purposes. So yeah, for 3 weeks Theo was to be observed, and then for the final week, that's when we went in and had a chat, and they would let us know their thoughts. So that was a couple of months later. Theo was 2.5, so it was in May 2017. Yeah, it was last May. So he was 2.5 at the time. So he went in, and all the children were observed. The parents were able to sit and chat with one another, which was quite nice, to share anecdotal stories about their children. You know, there seemed to be a lot of similarities with them all, which was nice, because, you know, that had been possibly one of the first times that I had been able to sit down and say something and somebody else says, oh yes, my child does that as well, because, you know, nobody else's child around me at that time was doing similar things to Theo. So the 3 weeks passed, and then on the 4th week, my husband was away. My husband's in the military, so he is away a lot, so he wasn't able to come along to any of those sessions, and he wasn't able to come along for the final week because he was away. So I went with my sister and one of my very good friends, and they came along to that meeting with me. And during that meeting, the consultant, I think it was a bit of a blur, to be honest. I mean, although I had been expecting them to say that Theo had autism, it was still a huge shock as well, in a way, that they had concluded. So the consultant paediatrician said that yes, Theo did have autism. He had a significant speech delay. She wasn't able to comment on his cognitive ability, purely down to the fact that he was unable to engage with any of the professionals in the room. So she was unable to ascertain as to where he was in terms of his cognitive ability, and we're still not clear on that. That still hasn't taken place. If I were to hazard a guess, just in comparison to where Talia was at that age and some of my friends' children who are at that age, I would probably guesstimate that Theo is maybe at a similar cognitive ability of a child at around maybe 16 to 18 months. So significantly behind. He'll be 4 this year, so he is still quite far behind in that respect. I mean, in a lot of areas he is very behind. So yeah, we received that diagnosis in May last year, and the appointment is a bit of a blur. I can't really remember too much about the specifics or what they said. I think once they said he had autism, I kind of just shut off. I couldn't think about anything else. I had lots of things that spiraled through my mind, and I was very emotional. I was very upset to hear those words. As I said, I had and my husband, we had expected them to say that, so in some ways it wasn't a shock, but I guess to hear it, it did really surprise me. So that's kind of, the story of how we got to the diagnosis process. So it started, I think Theo was about 18, 19 months old when we first initially saw the speech and language therapist at the drop-in centre, to then being aged 2.5 to receive his autism diagnosis, which compared to some, it was quite a quick process. The UK is renowned for not being particularly quick or efficient when it comes to diagnosing autism, especially in younger children, but for us, I mean, it felt like it was forever, but it wasn't in compared to other people who I know have waited a very long time to receive diagnosis. So yeah, that is how we got there. I do have some friends who are going through similar experiences currently, and I shared, the journey that we had, but sadly the speech and language drop-in clinics in our area are no longer in existence. They've been cut due to funding difficulties, which is a real shame, because that really was the biggest step for me to take, and was the first step in getting Theo the right help and support he needed, and eventually getting the diagnosis that he needed. So I'm really saddened to hear that. So I don't really know how people are supposed to get their foot through the door, because the GP for me wasn't particularly receptive when I went to her about my concerns, and the health visitor wasn't greatly helpful. So I worry for people now in a similar position and how they kind of get the ball rolling themselves. But hopefully that will change, and maybe more funding will be put in place, and perhaps maybe those clinics will be re-established, which would be amazing. So yeah, that's how we got to Theo's diagnosis. If you have any questions about what we went through, or who we saw, or anything like that at all, then please comment below and let me know. So I guess in the next video what I would like to talk about is moving forward from the diagnosis to where we are now. We're almost a year down the road in terms of having an official diagnosis for Theo, so I'd like to talk a little bit about kind of the road from there forward. So yeah, I'm going to leave you for today. I've waffled on for long enough, and yeah, so I will speak with you again soon. Thanks ever so much for thanks ever so much for watching. Bye.